Okay. Last week was the 20th anniversary of The Gathering Wilderness. Time flies when you're a miserable bastard. That is the moral of the story. So today I'm just going to talk off the top of my head about this album, about why it's not actually the album we set out to make, but it happened to become one in the canon of the band that people consider one of their favorites. And I'm just going to talk about how that came to pass. It's the fifth album. The previous one, Storm Before Calm. I've done a video, talked about that before. That's a very strange record. We recorded that in Academy Studios over in Yorkshire in 2002, I think. The sound of that album is sort of quite digital. Even though we didn't really know what we were doing, we went over there wasn't any physical amps. But you can go back and listen to me talk about that one if you really, really want to. But then Hammer Art Records, the label that we were signed to, sort of a combination of, well, I guess they just sort of went bust. They just sort of disappeared, and we were left with no label. And we sort of shopped the band around, talked to a couple of people, and all of the usual suspects you can imagine that were reasonably, sort of well known in the metal scene at the time, expressed some levels of interest. I'm not going to go into who they were and who they weren't. I suppose in the year 2003 and 4, you can probably imagine who they were. And it was really, I think, at the beginning because Primordial had played at Wacken Open Air, I think in 2002 maybe. We played in 98. We played in... we become friends with some of the Metal Blade people, specifically Garrett from Sacred Steel, the war god of metal himself. And I think Garrett, I'd met at a festival and sort of mentioned, we're not, we don't have a label. And he'd said it to the immortal Michael Trengart, the much missed, departed head honcho of Metal Blade back then. Wonderful human being who has sadly departed this mortal coil. That... we were looking for a label. So I went to Germany, had a meeting with him. He just sort of laid it out straight off the cards, just sort of said, don't bullshit me, don't whatever, If anybody knew Michael, they would know exactly the style he would deal with a chancer like me, an Irish, Egypt. And anyway, The Gathering Wilderness is the first record that came from that. The first one for Metal Blade. The reasons we picked Metal Blade were because, obviously, being fans of all of the 80s records, big fans of all of the Serathon Gauls before we get to the Slayers and all the, all that kind of stuff. And also because it seemed unusual. There didn't really seem to be any bands who sounded like us on Metal Blade, whereas maybe we had more peers at Century Media or at Nuclear Blast or that kind of thing. So the choice was really stand out on this label, and we sort of had an immediate rapport with Michael and the people there in the old office. And we were rehearsing for this record in an area of Dublin called Whitehall, in the same room as Abaddon Incarnate and Gyasa, if I'm not incorrect. Dirty old room that I think is still being used. Dread Sovereign every now and again have rehearsed in it. Also the covers band that I did with Johnny from Conan and Shawnee from Unyielding Love rehearsed there. We had a few kind of like secret heavy metal soirees there during the lockdown. And I think a lot of records came out of that room. A lot of good Irish heavy metal records. And this is where we wrote songs like The Coffin Ships and that kind of thing. And we really had kind of complete artistic freedom for Metal Blade. So I'll kind of go through my scattered memories of the process of what behind the thinking that went into The Gathering Wilderness is, the wilderness is gathering all its children in, is a line from Leonard Cohen. I think it's from Avalanche, maybe, on Songs of Love and Hate, if that's where you want to know where I robbed the title from. I've seen people discussing what they think the song means, what they think the album means. You're all wrong. And I'm here. You could just ask me what it means. But what we wanted was before we get to the artwork, let's go into the consideration. What we wanted was, after Stone Before Calm, to make a more earthy, bigger, analog sounding record, and we were really, really impressed with High on Fire at the time. Not the second album. What is that High on Fire album? Surrounded by Thieves, is it? And Billy Anderson, of course, engineered that, and of course then the old Neurosis albums that Billy did. And I had a mutual friend, AJ, who was in the band 13, I think. Is it 13? Sorry, AJ, if I got that wrong. And we sort of were big fans of this High on Fire album. We were looking around for an engineer, wondering what to do. And we found a studio in Dublin, mainly dealt with trad music, which would become a bit of a problem subsequently, mainly because they didn't have enough inputs for a heavy metal drum kit. But nice little studio, still there, just off the top of Pierce Street in Dublin, around the corner from Fibber McGee's, if that's your signpost within Dublin. And we sort of made contact with Billy. Billy was and is quite famous. Back then, he had, there was a big reputation around Billy. I think he just made some tragedy. Sorry, I'm fixing my stupid headgear here. Probably because I'm trying to stimulate the rather addled grey matter that lies underneath to try and dredge up some memories of this record. And lo and behold, we got in contact with Billy. He was coming to Europe anyway, as far as I remember, to play the bass with the Melvins, which will subsequently become a part of this story as we proceed. But the Melvins were not a band any of us here were really into, so we really didn't understand the enormity of that. Just of that for Billy. And so we managed to concoct all of these things together. Billy stayed in my house for 3 weeks. I stayed on the couch in my own front room for 3 weeks, which, as you can imagine, was full of, if you've ever seen The Odd Couple, that's kind of what it was like for 3 weeks. And it was a particularly miserable moment in Dublin. I mean, I think there'd been some tragedies within the band, within, some family situations that we've been through before with Primordial, where you've thought maybe we should sort of not cancel things, but, postpone things. But very often when those things happen to you, you want to work, you want to push ahead, you want to be creative. And that's kind of, some of that went into that record, I think. I think I could be okay with saying that kind of thing 20 years later. And it was done under some rather gloomy auspices. And I think you can hear this, of course, on the record. But the studio itself was more for trad music. And we went in there with Billy. Billy was living in my house. And I remember the songs being pretty well formed. We're pretty well rehearsed. Normally with Primordial, we're between 50 and 70% rehearsed for an album, unless it's Journey's End, where you're like 30% rehearsed. And you leave stuff to chance. You leave stuff to the fact that you're an artist. Take of that what you will. Or that you trust in yourself to improvise in the moment in the studio. It was where we were all beginning to really get a hold on our different roles in the band. I didn't want or felt the need to do the vocals in front of, the sort of jury of people going yes, no, or we weren't micromanaging each other. Everyone was sort of being trusted to do their part properly. It was the first album that Michael played on. Michael contributed some songs to this, of course. Now, if you ask me exactly what they were, I'm not exactly sure. I'm pretty sure it could be Tragedy's Birth, maybe The End of All Times. I don't know. Sorry, Mick. My memory is, not perfect with this record. And we'll get into the songs one by one in a moment. But it was clear when we started recording that, of course, Billy's, nocturnal lifestyle suited mine. And we kind of wanted to work at night. Other people with families and kids, of course, want to come in at 9 and 10 in the morning. And it's not something you think about, but it's always a kind of a juxtaposition of different lifestyles that are sort of, jarring or, a little bit difficult to approximate. And also because you're recording right in the city centre has its benefits and also its distractions. Because if you have a spare hour, you just go, I'll go to the pub. And then all of a sudden half a day is lost, as you can imagine in Dublin. And whereas I kind of prefer recording in the middle of nowhere so you don't have any distractions, we made Spirit the Earth the Flame and this in a city. And this one, I think you can hear there's a more haphazard nature to some of the sounds because there was a sort of having all of us there at the same time didn't happen very often. The studio also wasn't very big and there wasn't really a sort of recreation room. And if you're sitting around all day waiting for somebody to do whatever their parts are, and you have nowhere to sit or to watch a movie or something, the temptation again, of course, is in a city to just fuck it, let's just go to the pub. And that can lead to tension. But initially, I think we wanted something, and I say it's not the album we meant to make, in the fact that there are pre-mixed demos somewhere, which I don't think have ever been heard, that after the album came out, we were initially disappointed with how it sounded when it was mastered, and I'll get to that at the end as well. We felt that the pre-mix recordings we had were better than the album. I mean, I don't know if there's any great will amongst people to want to hear what those were, but I may consult the oracle that is Paul Gawley on the bass and see if he has those CDRs somewhere. But we remember being blown away, and then somehow we dropped the ball in the last 4 or 5 days of making the record. But the studio was very odd. I'm going to put my glasses on for a moment. And we start with the Golden Spiral. This is a very simple song, which we've just reintroduced to the live set now. I think it's a really great song that has a really great building momentum live, where we're using this kind of dung 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 dung. So you could basically just go bung dung 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 and more or less be in for the whole song. This idea of a kind of droning, churning note underneath the music, and a very simple lyric, basically just a paean to nature, a hymn to nature. Just really, really simple song that I think resonated with a lot of people. I can see here in the original record, I used to be really into this idea of writing an explanation of the songs, just in case you were forgotten what they must mean. I can hardly read it here, but the pantheon of old gods in any language are man's natural relation to the elements. These gods are human in every respect, animistic. The concept of the never-ending spiral is what binds us. We are bound by blood and the legacy of their gods. Okay, I mean, I was really, I think, really into sort of 90s epic heavy metal like Virgin Steel and Manowar, and the idea that you sort of had to explain the songs. I find it quite strange. I just stopped doing it after this record. And there's also a big introduction, winter of 2004. There's a big introduction. The wilderness is growing in men's hearts. The wilderness is gathering all its children in for one last desperate struggle. These might be our last days, and maybe just we'll take them down with us. These seem like desperate times, like a tiny vessel amid a mighty storm, trying to hold fast, trying to stay upright in this storm, trying to understand all the freedoms, the liberties, the decisions that are simply taken out of your hands, out of your country's hands, out of your nation's hands, to understand the injustices visited upon your kind over and over again. I'm not having a stroke, because I have to state in almost every video. Our grip on the rope is loosening. I mean, yeah, it's full of the drama and pathos that I was trying to inspire. It's within all of Primordial, that sense of loss, of martyrdom, of struggle, of sacrifice, especially from your country like Ireland, which is such a bloody, fractious history, that has such a dark history, that has such a history of rebellion and resistance of empire. And many people sort of misunderstood some of the lyrics then, almost sensing that I was, I won't say pro-authoritarianism, but they sensed that because you're talking about these things, that somehow you must be condoning them. It couldn't be further from the truth. You're actually the complete opposite. You're opposing them. You're standing for liberty and freedom and all those kind of things. I mean, it shouldn't need saying. I don't think it needed saying in 2005. Maybe it needs more saying in 2025. I don't know. But now is the time to decide your place within it, embrace it, fight it, use it. Yeah, I think it was just the growing technological advances in the world, the growing sort of lack of humanity, the growing all those things to try and resist it, whether it was through art. I think I was very much inspired by the idea that Primordial was a continuation of a sort of artistic continuation of a greater Irish cultural struggle, identification of the idea that art was rebellion, you know, culture being resistance, all that kind of stuff. And Golden Spiral is just a very, very simple song. I think it was probably, I mean, look, there's quite a lot of Bathory in it. The Gathering Wilderness, the song, is one of my favourite Primordial songs. I love the opening riff. Do, 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 do. That's out of tune, Kieran would say. The ghosts of our pasts are gathered at the borders of every nation, waiting to rain a terrible wrath upon us. Yeah, there's no letting up. And I think it's what it did strike a nerve with people when we released it, in the sense that it was kind of like a song like Golden Spiral is essentially pagan metal, but pagan metal then was becoming associated with power metal, and we were like the dark side of the moon to that kind of stuff. I mean, it was unrelentingly serious. It's not that we were people without hope or a sense of humour, but the music was always unrelentingly dark and serious, and I think that struck some kind of a nerve with people. And of course I've just ruined it by making lots of YouTube videos to the contrary since then. The Garden of Wilderness song, you say you know me, I'm the poison in your veins, my faith is not welcome here, I break the young and the old, the bold. One day I stood. Again, first person narrative in lyrics. When you think of the masters of this sort of character narrative, let's say Nick Cave, you take, you know, Red Right Hand or something like this, or Stagger Lee. This is I think that's very difficult to do, is to use a character to tell a narrative. It's much easier for lyricists or heavy metal bands to put it I, the first person narrative. I've tried to write first person character narratives. It's very difficult. To Hell of the Hangman is a little bit like that, where you're telling a story as if you're the eyes of the person. The eyes of the person. Come on. The Garden of Wilderness. Yeah, I built my Tower of Song. Another nod to Leonard Cohen. From bitter and splintered bone, gnarled and wretched, spiteful and harsh. I mean, sometimes you write a lyric and it's not really about it having any particular meaning. It's about the picture that it's painting with the words. It's about making it visual, making it, is it called onomatopoeic or something, or that the sounds, the words sound like what they mean. Like, put me in the comments if I'm incorrect with that. I probably am incorrect with that, but that's what I wanted all that song to be. The wilderness is gathering all its children in, and just make this wretched sort of vile song. Sometimes back then as a young man you wanted to make something that was really emotionally distressing for people, really impactful, where it wasn't offensive, where it was almost so dark that you thought people were going to go, hang on, wait, what the fuck did he just say? Did he really say, I've cursed the vermin of the earth, I've wished pestilence upon the foul and weak, not just men but women and children too. A callback to the burning season, with a rusted blade across their throats. Yeah, I mean, what does that mean? Again, for the people who would want to take art literally, that's obviously not exactly what you're saying. It's an attempt to make something really, just a sort of paint a really dark picture. A great song, and they all do. Is it got a lot of Candlemas, Trouble, St. Vitus, a lot of doom, rolling into that. The Song of the Tomb. I think this was inspired by, well, let's see what I've written here. Our myths are steeped in blood and tragedy and the grim acceptance of fate. The difference between these myths and the lessons they teach us on the modern day are virtually non-existent. A man's fate decided by the warmongers, the blade of a knife, a bullet from a gun, or a bomb is no different for the warmongers and warriors of legend. This is a rather odd sentence. There's no let up. He was a gloomy young man, was A.A. Nemthianga, and rightly so. The Song of the Tomb, from the north to the south, from the west to the east to the west. I mean, yeah, this is, I think, visiting some of the megalithic tombs in Ireland, you know, Newgrange and that kind of thing, and the corbelled vaults, and when you make your way down the narrow entrance into those old tombs around the area of Knowth and Douth and Newgrange. That's, I think, what I was trying to sort of write myself into, some sort of shamanistic state, or some sort of, you know, 2,500, 3,000 year old Celtic ritual state of mind, with the Song of the Tomb. Again, the drum opening was supposed to be very different sounding. I think it's a cool song. It's similar to the Golden Spiral. For when the sun rises again, to our deaths like condemned men. Yeah, I mean, it's got a heroism that you can find in the 80s traditional heavy metal, which of course was, you know, my main thing then, listening back to all the Manila Road and Sirathungal and Manowar and Heavy Load and all that kind of chest beating, uplifting heroicism, but also with this very dark sense of gloom and despair at the heart of it. End of all times, the martyr's fire. Why I needed to feel the need to put the martyr's fire in brackets after it. These are desperate times. I mean, AA, you've said that 4 times already. The odds are stacked against us. Surely the day will come when the wolf is let loose. Is this all I've been left? Broken oaths and betrayals, the empty words and dread rhetoric of the soul, of the souled and drunken culture. I have a feeling this song might not have been about culture. I have a feeling it might have been about a girl. Who knows? End of all times. Aren't they all about both? I really like, there's a moment in this song halfway through where the riff changes and it picks up and there's a kind of a key change. I have a feeling this was a Mick Flynn key change, and it's absolutely glorious. It's one of my favourite Primordial bits. Now, there's a moment, when we were writing the song, there's a moment where a song goes dugga 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 dugga. It's not going to sound very good on the podcast, but if you're watching on video, you'll get my point. Bugga dugga 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 dugga. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's see. Anyway, that's the wrong drum beat. I think we all agreed afterwards it should have sped up much quicker, much sooner. But as it then does a great snare roll from Simon, it picks up, and the last half of that song very much reminds me of the second half of Death of the Gods, which is on Redemption, which is another great song, and another Mick Flynn riff. And it just picks up. I think it ends up in this very anguished, pained way. And I think this bit is it, you know. Well, these might be my last days, because I am about to eclipse my sun. Eclipse my sun. Yeah. Collapse my veins. Yeah, that whole section. That's one of my favourite. We don't play it very often. We're going to have to, maybe soon if we play the whole record. And that was one of my favourite bits to sing. There's a few times when you're a singer and the riff comes and you go, oh, that, I have to sing over that. For example, Stolen Years on Exile Amongst the Ruins. Originally Kieran meant it as an instrumental, and I heard it, and it's just so fucking beautiful. There is the instrumental version is on the bonus disc, but that song was like, oh, I have to. There's no way that I can't sing over this, because it just instantly, I had the lyric, and it all fit almost perfectly. One take, not even rehearsed. We didn't rehearse it. As soon as I heard it, I was like, I know what I want to do with this. And literally the vocals were done in 10-15 minutes. And there's a moment when you sing that song, Stolen Years, and you go, oh, here comes the moment. And that's, those moments are really special. The Coffin Ships, well, now, this has become our signature song, our, Ace of Spades. if you want to call it that. I remember when Kieran came up with the riff in that dingy old rehearsal room, and we weren't all convinced by it at the beginning, if you can believe that. It reminded me a bit of Famous Blue Raincoat by Leonard Cohen. Leonard, you're getting a lot of shout-outs wherever you are. The picking at the start. But you knew as soon as, this is, this is going to be a heavy song. This is going to be like a... Sometimes you think a song is going to be the cornerstone of an album, and everyone else picks a different song. Our people listening pick a different song. But that was the one we knew, this is going to be a huge song. We tend to play it a bit faster live than on the record, and you forget that there's violin in the original as well. I can't remember who was the girl who played the violin, but it's got that. If you listen to Red in the Sky is Ours by At the Gates, which is a brilliant record and a very bleak black record, there's a couple of bits of violin there which sound amazing, and I think that might have been our thought, that we wanted something that sounded like that on the record. But the thing with the Coffin Ships is that the part in the middle, nerve and muscle, heart and bone, nerve and muscle, lost to Ireland, lost in vain. Yeah, this was written on a gravestone down in, I think, in Skibbereen, and I was down there and I wrote it down. And it had been sitting in my lyric book for ages. And I'd wanted to write a song about the famine, the Irish famine, 1845, 1849, but not a history lesson, which had years and dates in it. And, in 1845 this happened. I never really liked lyrics like that were history lessons. But you wanted to get across the sense of loss for the whole song, but also write it in such a way that no matter where you were from, you didn't have to be of Irish diaspora to understand, this is tragedy. This is this band, wherever they're from, this is their tragedy. And that's the weight of the song. So if you were standing at a festival and you could, we were playing it, you would be standing beside your friend and go, fucking hell, they mean it. This is serious. And that was the weight that we wanted to try and get across. Well, we have always tried to get across that weight, whether we succeed or not. But the Coffin Ships was that. That's the weight of this period of Irish history. And I felt after it that we travel around the world playing that song, doing sort of Irish culture proud, to be the standard bearers for, or one of the standard bearers for, traveling around the world, letting people into the tragedy, almost like living history. It wasn't fantasy, it wasn't mythology, whereas Primordials never really sang about that kind of stuff. A few times, Sons of the Morrigan, but it's an allegory for migration or whatever. But Coffin Ships became the song that we can't really not play anymore live. Tragedy's birth. The crippled oracle breathes his lungs like grit. Another lyric that's trying to not really... I'm not sure that it has a huge meaning. I think I was trying to write in a sort of Poe-esque, Lovecraftian sort of optical way. I don't really sure that I can tell you it has any great deeper meaning. It's a good song. I think it's a high standard deep cut from the record. Cities Carved in Stone. This is one of my favourite Primordial songs. Really gloomy. It's got a Candlemas sort of vibe, a doom vibe. And my lasting memory of that is being left alone to mix it. I mixed the record with Billy, more or less, for the 4 days we mixed it. And I ended up, for whatever reason, having to try and decide which guitar leads should be prominent and not prominent. And apparently there's another mix of it somewhere which makes more sense if you play the guitar. It used to be in the live set. I have a vivid memory of playing it in Finland a few years ago and it being really great. Why haven't we been back to Finland in such a long time? Do you not like us anymore, Finland? Possibly not. But Cities Carved in Stone. Yeah, Aoife King on the violin. Fair play, Aoife. I just read that. The studio is called The Cauldron. The Cauldron Studios. Recorded during the month of October 2004. additional engineering and mixing by Kevin Byrne. Now, I do have to say that during the mixing, Billy got the information that he wasn't going on tour with the Melvins, and I think at that stage all he wanted to do was go home. To be fair, I think he was utterly fed up with that news and totally deflated. And I think the last, getting the record over the line, ended up being done by myself, Paul, and the assistant engineer, who was only a young guy who'd never really made a record before. I think sort of Billy had vacated the building. I don't think he would mind me now saying after 20 years. And the label were like, we need the masters. We need them as soon as possible, literally within a week of finishing the record. And the two guys who ran the studio, I can't remember their names, really nice guys, but they were like, yeah, we could do mastering. We could do mastering. And someone had Blackwater Park on CD, and they were going between Blackwater Park and the album and going, look, it's as loud as that. It's as loud as that. Of course it wasn't, and it was mastered terribly. There should have been some time spent on the mastering. It's a record that needs a remastering, and that's what I mean when I say it doesn't sound like how we meant it to sound. It became a people's favourite record because it didn't really sound like anything at the time. It's a very claustrophobic record. It's a very dark record, but it's full of flaws. It's full of odd sounds. The tones on things change from song to song, often from within the song sometimes. Rhythm guitars change, cut in and out. It's full of flaws and mistakes in that sense, like I said, for the reasons I just said. It does really need an overhaul, a master, but on the other hand, I'm loath to do it because the flaws are what give it its character, and people fell in love with it on those terms. So who am I to go back and fuck with it and go, well, I want a beefier bass drum sound? And then you're messing with people's cherished memories of a record that at the time was quite at odds with the metal scene. It was sort of impenetrably dark. It was stepped up out of the pagan black metal scene, or whatever you want to call it, with this sort of Irish sort of sense to it. But there's also this tragic, earthy, sodden struggle within the record. Like it's got a lot of it's a dark record. The artwork originally was a photograph by my good mate Ada Butler, one time housemate and bass player of Morning Beloved back in the day. He just had these photos that he'd taken down in the middle of nowhere in Ireland, and I just saw this, and I had just had this idea of the logo in the middle, and to make the record not glossy, matte. So if you have the original record, it's not matte, and that's very little was done to the original photo. It was just taken at dusk somewhere in the Midlands, not generated or CGI'd, and it just seemed perfect, just sort of fit perfect. If you have the CD of it, and it was the first time it was the first record we were able to make it exactly, or at least I was able to do it, kind of like boss it, make it in a way that we really, really wanted to. Now, I will say this: if you have this disc too, please throw it in the bin. I'm glad this isn't, and please don't upload it. It's a weird kind of like, I think we had two art students in who just sort of had asked could they come in and film us for a few days, and there's some parts of it are not so bad, and the label was again like, we need a bonus disc. Back when people bought physical copy and all that, we need a bonus disc, we need something else. And we just thought, can you cobble together a sort of little documentary on the making of it? I'm sure it's kind of cute and got some interesting parts on it of us playing here and there, but I seem to remember being a bit, after the album came out, kind of thinking to myself, I wish I hadn't put that in there. But it is what it is. Again, CD looks beautiful, very untypical Metal Blade looking album, untypical of everything at the time, I think. And I think it's I understand why people say to me like this could be their favourite Primordial album, or the one that spoke to them. Don't forget, when you're a band who have a long career, where you catch people at a certain moment in their lives is what an album will mean something to them. Some people say, 10 albums in, how it ends, is it as good as The Gathering Wilderness? Well, you know what? If it had come out at the time in your life when Gathering Wilderness did, it probably would have meant the same thing to you. I think there's I mean, I would say this, but I think there's a pretty reasonable standard between all the records. But this was one that just hit at a certain time, and it was where we took a little step up for being, just beginning to play festivals and some smaller tours, to maybe coming in from the third stage to the opening or second on the first stage. We're busy moving back out now. our appeal is becoming more selective. But it sort of gathered coffin chips, and it was To Name Is Dead, the next album, that sort of really broke the band through to the next step, and maybe I'll discuss that some other time. But the Gathering Wilderness remains a sort of very dark album in the canon. I think it looks beautiful still. I think it has a tragic, flawed sense of character. I think it's very Irish, and it's without sounding Irish, if you know what I mean. It's just got this really potent mix of flawed character, intensity, drama, pathos, passion, and blah 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 blah. Yeah, it's one I'm very proud of, and last year was the 20th year of its release. And I think everyone involved did a kind of fucked up but pretty good job of making an album that has stood the test of time with character, and 20 years. And so later this year, or well, maybe next year, who knows, everybody seems to celebrate any anniversary these days, 23, 33, 17, whatever. So maybe next year we can play the album in its 21st year, its entirety. But yeah, well, the Gathering Wilderness, my friends, it's been my miserable pleasure to discuss our fifth album, The Gathering Wilderness, halfway point in our career as cultural miserabilists. Well then, until next time. Agitators Anonymous, over and out.